Click the links for Odyssey and Bit Chute. People on, I think, Bit Chute and Odyssey go, you reuse thumbnails all the time. Yeah, because making original thumbnails actually takes more time than you think. It's so much easier to just get an image of a Brittany Ventney with the skull mask and just change the word balloon over her head to anything based, offensive, and istophobic that I can think of that day. Whatever is sure to offend, and just combine those things in some free image app editing software that I can. It takes 2 minutes to do that, as opposed to 20 minutes to come up with something original. Anyway, so as I look for thumbnails, which is a lot of fun actually, like I could see where people have big channels where making thumbnails would be like its own kind of science and craft. So I'm looking for Chinese democracy because they're talking about the Hollywoods kind of falling out of love with China, and I came to this bizarro website called Overthinking It, where they called the musical Talmud Chinese democracy. Axl Rose takes us on a tour de force of international relations and modern Chinese history. So what they do is they overthink it. They go through pop music lyrics and try to analyze what the artist was thinking of, and they go through the history of Chinese democracy, which I guess he may have started writing. I mean, you could do an interview with him and ask him. He may have started writing in 1994, and finally released. Here's the funny thing about Chinese democracy, and I think it was a Fiona Apple album called. I think it was Extraordinary Machine. Both before those albums got released officially, all that stuff was leaked on P2P. This was back in like in the 90s, I think. All the stuff was leaked. All the early songs, the early tracks, either live tracks or studio recordings, was all leaked, and you could hear it. And both Extraordinary Machine and Chinese Democracy, the raw leaks were better than the album releases that came a few years later. And listening to the album releases, like, why did they decide to release this sanitized version when you had the raw live songs? Like, I heard how good they were. I still have those. You should have just made live albums for both those albums, and they would have been off the hook. Instead, they did these studio albums. You're like, they're good. Don't get me wrong, they're both very good. But they took a lot of the spark off it. Where are they going with this? Anyway, this is some bizarro overthinking it. They go through pop music and just overanalyze it. Okay, so this article is they're talking about China and Hollywood is kind of falling out a little bit of love, somewhat. I mean, it's going to be difficult for China. China's saying they want to make a more prominent, they want to have a more prominent role in their own Chinese version of Hollywood to make their movies more prominent. And it's like people are going to like what they're going to like. So even the Chinese audience is really in love with a lot of Hollywood stuff because the kind of stuff that China is on board with. Stuff you remember the Transformers movies with it's a bunch of CGI explosions, robots running around beating other robots. The dialogue, if it's translated, there's not a lot of nuance lost because you've got some hot chicks in the movies who are running around the deserts with their boobs bouncing around. That was Megan Fox running around the desert, running around a CGI, I don't know, studio, dodging, green actors carrying imaginary explosions and stuff. You watch how they film this stuff. It's like, oh, it just takes all the magic right out of it. Watch Gal Gadot rolling around on a green screen. It just looks ridiculous. Or even Star Wars. God, that was horrible. I mean, the prequels, the 1999 ones. Anyway, that's what China's into, where the translation doesn't really matter so much. It's just hot chicks and monsters blowing stuff up. And the thing is, that's what Hollywood does really well. They've been doing it for probably 20 years now. Is when that superhero kick really kind of took off. And so, China's going to love what they're going to love. And yes, the Chinese audience can do that. China could make their own movies, but the thing is, Hollywood has those IPs. So China would have to blatantly make like clone movies. Like instead of the Transformers, it would be, you can make a movie about robots that use nanotechnology to change shape and engage in battles, and hot English girls with big boobs are running around. Though in China, I don't know if they prefer an English audience, a Western audience, European audience, actors, or their own Chinese actors. Maybe for a little bit of difference, they want European actors. I don't know. The Europeans seem to sell pretty well to China, which is weird because if I was Chinese, I'd be like, why wouldn't you want to see? But I mean, they do have Jackie Chan movies, which throughout the 80s and 90s, which did very well in China and abroad because they were friggin' mainly because of the power of Jackie Chan. And they had hot Chinese chicks in those too. You know, half those were filmed in China and half were filmed in Canada. Those did very well. So people think China is this huge market, and it is, but the thing you have to keep in mind is the domestic take, the percentage you take domestically is for the film house is very high, and the foreign take is very low. So $1 billion domestic is much, much better than $1 billion in China, but it's not nothing. It's like, oh, well, I don't know what it is. It's like 150 million, 50, say 10 to 15%. It's like, it's still something. It's still a big chunk of change. So they don't want to throw that away for nothing. But then China has a lot of strings that are attached to it. Spirituality, Falun Gong, Christianity, anything to do with spirits and ghosts and demons for some reason has got issues in China. And I mean, obviously, you can never make the Chinese government or the state look bad in any way whatsoever. Or even the characters look too bad. You got to be very careful about that kind of stuff. So it is money, but it's not a cash cow, and it has strings attached. Though it is a cash cow for certain types of movies, like the Transformers movies, which like that made $1 billion in America, and it probably made the same amount in China, which is a less percentage, but it's like such an easy movie to write. It's just hot chicks running around and explosions and robots. It doesn't take a rocket science to write that. So if China cut off the American film industry tomorrow, it actually wouldn't be the end of Hollywood, and it would probably improve Hollywood to the extent that Hollywood could be improved, which is kind of abandon all hope, ye who enter here. There's no like Hollywood is driving the train to wokeness. Nobody is pulling Hollywood to the left. It's not social media pulling Hollywood. Hollywood is going in the direction they absolutely want to go into, and they're not dumb people. They know exactly what they're doing. Anyway, my point with the China thing is, remember back in the '80s, there was a little bit of a Cold War going on, and the thing is, there were a lot of books that focus on the Cold War, the Charm School, the Little Drummer Girl, the Hunt for Red October. I think Nelson DeMilo. I forget the guy who wrote the Little Drummer Girl. I think he's a French guy. He wrote a ton of these Cold War books. Tom Clancy. All these guys wrote just they love writing this stuff. It was great. The spy versus spy books that would later inspire a bunch of films. You had a whole book in film universe from the 1950s to I don't know 1989 when the wall came down. You remember that and that Scorpions song if you're a child of the 80s. That was a rich environment in which to write because they were legitimate bad guys. They were human rights abuses. People were struggling to get out of Russia and Eastern Europe and coming to the West and reporting about the atrocities of communism, authoritarian state, all that kind of stuff. So it was a lot of fun. I even remember Dan Aykroyd and Chevy Chase, Spies Like Us. What a classic film that was. It was an amazing universe, and it all just ended in 1989. I'm sure all those authors who specialized in that, it's like Tom Clancy and Nelson, they're like, okay, well, I guess we're going to switch to the other area of the world that has a lot of conflict, as our, we'll start going into that universe in the 90s for a decade, and they did, and it worked out pretty well. But the puppet masters who run Hollywood looked at that area of the world and what they wanted to do to the West. So they started telling these Hollywood stories with nuance where the West was the bad guys, which is a real tough sell when you're talking about that area of the world because there's a lot of human rights abuses like off the friggin' hook. Like, oh, we Westerners have it so hard with our pronouns. You're like, have you looked at some other parts of the world? Have you maybe considered going there? Or the kids on Twitter are talking about, oh, it's capitalism is because there's all the reasons America has failed. It's like, if you import more labor, the value of labor not only goes down, but the cost of housing goes up. What are you saying? Are you saying open borders or? Well, yeah, I'm just saying, if you have like free taxpayer funded programs, you're going to get people flooding in who take more out of the system than they pay into the system. It's like you can be a 10-year-old and you can figure that out. Well, just print more money then. Yeah, I don't think you're following. I don't think you live. What's the color of the sky in your world, you sweet, sweet summer child? Where's it going with this? China's asshole, right? And I was going to say, I guess I'll say person of color shaped hole in the landscape. The Hollywood landscape, China is just a geographic place. Well, it's a rich storytelling medium to grow these stories in. right? I mean, you could do like, just like you do with Russia. It's like, my friend, Russia was not the market that China is. China's a market, Russia's not. So we can make these movies insulting Russians as just, violent alcoholics all we want. No problem. There's no repercussions for that whatsoever. Because there's no moral high ground here. There's no principled stand. These Hollywood Epsteins and Weinsteins lecture us about whatever, blonde man bad pronouns and, European privilege type of stuff. Literal Epstein, Weinstein types are lecturing us about this. And then you go, wait, but don't you guys work with China? Like the most horrific rights abuses going on right now are actually going on in China. So LeBron, where do you get your tennis shoes made? Like maybe those tennis shoes should be made in America where there'll be decent working conditions and unions and that kind of thing. Maybe not sweatshops made in China. You guys want to address that issue? No. We just want to lecture you on blonde man bad, and LeBron needs to call you out on your privilege. It's like, but isn't Nike and all those other companies made in China in sweatshops? Like, do they have unions? Do they have good working conditions, or do they have like self-deletion prevention nets to save people from deleting themselves in the factories? My point is the hypocrisy about China is off the hook. Such a very careful video to make. So very careful. Will it get monetized, or like you upload videos and it's a green dollar sign means it's monetized and you make your dollar. Orange or yellow means they're thinking about it. And anyway, we'll see what happens. I think I was careful. But anyway, like, comment, subscribe, join the channel, and I will see you guys next episode.